In the remote, sun-scorched town of Desert's End, Evelyn Steele lives a quiet, solitary life. To the locals, she's just a reclusive farmer with a loyal German shepherd named Kodiak. But Evelyn has a secret. She's a former operative with years of experience in covert operations, a past she has tried to leave behind. However, the desert is about to become a battleground once again. A powerful paramilitary group known as the Ecliptic arrives in the region, hunting for something buried deep beneath the sands. A forgotten government relay site holding dangerous, classified technology. Led by the ruthless Lucas Grant, the Ecliptic's mission is clear. Secure the relay site at any cost and harness the technology for their own gain. What they don't expect is resistance from Evelyn, who knows the secrets of the site better than anyone. With limited resources and few allies, Evelyn must outthink and outmaneuver an overwhelming force. Using the unforgiving desert terrain to her advantage, she prepares a series of traps and ambushes to cripple the Ecliptic's advance. But her enemies are relentless, and the odds are stacked against her. As tensions escalate, Evelyn faces not only a battle for survival, but also the return of the ghosts of her past. The conflict unfolds in a high-stakes chess match of tactics and strategy. Evelyn knows the Ecliptic believes in brute force, but she has something more powerful: patience and a deep understanding of their methods. Each step forward for Grant's men only leads them deeper into a deadly maze. But Evelyn also understands that victory won't come easily. As the sun sets over the desert, alliances will be tested, traps will be sprung, and Evelyn's legacy as a defender of the forgotten lands will be written in dust and shadow. But the question remains: will Evelyn's preparation be enough to stop a force that will stop at nothing? And when the final confrontation arrives, who will walk away from the sands of Desert's End? The story begins with a warning carried by the wind. Never underestimate someone who has mastered the art of patience. The desert stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun, a vast, silent expanse of red sand and scattered rock formations. Evelyn Morgan stood at the edge of a dry riverbed, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The oppressive heat shimmered in the distance, giving the illusion of movement where there was none. Yet Evelyn knew better than to trust the stillness of the desert. It was a place of secrets, where danger could hide in plain sight. Kodiak, her loyal Belgian Malinois, trotted to her side and let out a soft, questioning bark. Evelyn knelt and gave the dog a firm pat. "Easy, boy. Just keeping an eye out," she murmured. Her voice, low and calm, was almost lost in the desert wind. She had lived out here for over a decade, away from the noise of the world she had left behind. It was supposed to be a place of peace, a place to bury her past. But something had changed in the last few weeks. She had seen unfamiliar tracks near abandoned government sites, and rumors had begun circulating in the nearby town of Desert's End. Rumors about strange men in black SUVs asking questions about the region's history. Evelyn didn't believe in coincidences. She stood and adjusted the brim of her wide-brimmed hat. The sun was sinking lower now, casting long shadows across the landscape. "Come on, Kodiak. Let's head back before the dark sets in." The two of them moved silently across the rugged terrain, Evelyn's boots crunching softly on the sand. The path back to her cabin took them past an old weather station, a relic from the days when the U.S. government had run clandestine operations in the desert. The facility had been decommissioned decades ago, but Evelyn could feel the weight of history in the air. She knew more about what had happened there than most. She paused briefly near the rusting fence surrounding the station. Something wasn't right. The gate, which was usually locked, stood slightly ajar. Evelyn's hand instinctively went to the knife on her belt. "Kodiak," she whispered. The dog froze, ears perked and alert. Evelyn slipped through the gate, her senses heightened. The area was eerily quiet. No desert birds, no wind, just the unsettling hum of silence. She crouched behind an old piece of equipment and scanned the area. Footprints in the sand led toward one of the station's side buildings. Fresh. Who the hell would come out here? She thought. Most locals didn't even know this place existed. She approached cautiously, her footsteps carefully placed to avoid making noise. As she rounded the corner of the building, she saw movement, two men in tactical gear, speaking in low voices near an open door. They weren't dressed like locals or hikers. military-grade equipment, earpieces, and weapons strapped to their sides. Evelyn clenched her jaw. Whoever they weren't here by accident. The men glanced around nervously before stepping inside. Evelyn waited a moment, then moved to a nearby window. She crouched low and peered in. The building was a mess of old machinery and crumbling walls, but the men were clearly interested in something deeper within. Coordinates matched the archive, one of them said, his voice clipped and professional. Command wants confirmation on the asset's condition. Think it's still intact after all these years? The other replied, pulling a handheld device from his belt. Doesn't matter. If it's here, we secure it. No one else gets access. Evelyn's mind raced. Archive? Asset? They were searching for something tied to the classified projects that had operated in this area decades ago. Project Horizon. Memories flooded back. Faces, places, warnings that had gone unheeded. She ducked away from the window, her pulse quickening. These men were dangerous, and whatever they were after could be catastrophic if it fell into the wrong hands. Kodiak gave a low growl. Evelyn stroked his head to calm him. Easy, boy. We'll deal with this. Just not here. She moved swiftly and silently away from the building, retreating the way she had come. She needed time to think, to plan. Desert's End might have ignored the growing tension for now, but Evelyn knew that trouble was coming. The town of Desert's End was as quiet as ever when Evelyn arrived later that evening. A single paved road ran through its center, lined with a few small businesses and houses. The town's population had dwindled over the years, leaving it with a skeleton crew of residents who preferred solitude over city life. Evelyn appreciated that. It meant fewer questions and fewer prying eyes. She parked her truck near May's Diner, the only place in town still buzzing with activity. Inside, the warm smell of coffee and frying bacon greeted her. A handful of locals sat at the counter or in booths, exchanging stories of the day. Evelyn, May called from behind the counter, her gray hair tied in a loose bun. Haven't seen you in a few days. Everything all right? Yeah, Evelyn replied, sliding onto a stool. Just been out near the old weather station. May raised an eyebrow. That place? Thought it was locked up tighter than a drum. Not anymore, Evelyn said quietly. There were some visitors. They weren't exactly tourists. May's expression darkened. She leaned in closer. You think it's got something to do with those men that V been poking around town? Couple of folks said they saw black SUVs heading toward the ridge last week. Probably, Evelyn muttered. She glanced around the diner, lowering her voice. Keep an eye out, May. Something's stirring out there, and it's not just the wind. You're scaring me, May said, though her tone was serious. What do you think they want? Something old. Something they shouldn't have. Evelyn stood and placed a few bills on the counter. If you see or hear anything strange, let me know. I will. As Evelyn stepped out into the cool desert night, she looked up at the sky. The stars shone brightly, unobstructed by city lights. It was beautiful, serene, deceptively peaceful, but Evelyn knew better than to trust appearances. She climbed into her truck and headed back toward her cabin. The time for staying hidden was over. Whatever the ecliptic was planning, she would be ready. The desert had taught her patience, but it had also taught her how to fight when the time came. And that time was drawing closer with every passing hour. Morning broke slowly across the desert, the horizon painted in hues of red and gold. The chill of the night still lingered, but the sun's steady climb would soon bring the blistering heat. Evelyn Morgan stood outside her cabin, arms crossed, her gaze distant as she sipped her coffee. Today felt different. The quiet wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, like the calm before a storm. Kodiak, sitting at her feet, let out a low whine. I know, boy, she murmured, glancing down at him. Something's coming. The events of the previous night lingered in her mind. The two men at the weather station weren't amateurs. Their equipment, their language, their precision, it all pointed to a larger, more organized force. Evelyn knew operations like this didn't happen without powerful backing. And whatever they were looking for, it was tied to Project Horizon. The memory of that project was like a ghost, always lingering on the edge of her thoughts. It had been decades since the incident that led to its termination, but some secrets refused to stay buried. Evelyn finished her coffee, and set the mug on the porch railing. She had to move quickly. If the Ecliptic had already begun searching for the old assets, they would escalate soon. The small town of Deserts End wouldn't stand a chance if they decided to use force. She walked to the back of her cabin, where a weathered wooden shed stood half buried in the sand. Inside, she pulled open a trapdoor hidden beneath an old tarp, revealing a metal staircase that led into the underground storage room she had built years ago. As she descended, the familiar scent of gun oil and dry earth greeted her. The room was stocked with supplies, weapons, tactical gear, old documents from her days with the CIA. Evelyn had prepared for the possibility that her past would come knocking one day. Now it had. She approached a large metal case in the corner and opened it. Inside lay a series of maps and blueprints. One map in particular caught her attention, a detailed layout of the weather station and the surrounding desert terrain. She ran her fingers over the lines and markings, memories surfacing like flashes of lightning. Back then, Project Horizon had been ambitious. The government had sought to create a secure satellite relay system that could bypass traditional communication networks. But the technology had been unstable, and a catastrophic failure had claimed the lives of several key operatives, including her closest friend, Jackson Kane. His death had marked the beginning of her disillusionment with the agency. Evelyn traced a section of the map marked Sector C3. That was where she had last seen the core relay equipment, buried deep beneath the desert floor. The Ecliptic was likely searching for that very spot. She folded the map and stuffed it into her pack. It was time to pay another visit to the weather station, but this time she wouldn't be caught off guard. By mid-morning, Evelyn was on the move. The road leading toward the weather station was empty, save for the occasional dust devil swirling across the barren landscape. She kept her truck speed low, mindful of any surveillance or roadblocks. As she neared the station, she parked the truck behind a rocky outcrop and continued on foot with Kodiak by her side. The air was dry and still, amplifying every sound. Evelyn moved cautiously, her senses sharp. The station came into view, silent and desolate, as it always appeared to outsiders. But Evelyn knew better. She scanned the area through binoculars, noting subtle changes. A small antenna had been installed on the roof of one of the buildings. It was new, definitely not part of the original structure. More footprints marked the sand near the entrance. "They've already started setting up," she muttered. Evelyn crept closer, using the natural cover of rocks and scrub to stay hidden. Kodiak stayed low, moving with practiced silence. As they approached the perimeter, Evelyn spotted a figure patrolling near the main building. A man in tactical gear, armed with an assault rifle. He moved with the precision of someone who had seen combat. This wasn't a simple security detail. The Ecliptic was serious. Evelyn waited until the patrol turned the corner, then slipped inside through a side entrance. The interior of the building was a mix of decay and recent activity. Dust-covered machinery stood alongside freshly placed equipment. She moved carefully through the corridors, listening for any signs of movement. In a central control room, she found what she was looking for, blueprints and schematics pinned to a wall. They were recent copies, with sections highlighted in red. Target coordinates confirmed, read a handwritten note at the bottom of one document. The coordinates matched Sector C3 on her map. "Damn it," Evelyn whispered. They were already narrowing in on the relay site. She heard footsteps approaching and quickly hid behind a stack of crates. Two men entered the room, their voices low but urgent. "Command says we need to move faster," one of them said. "They're concerned about local interference." "From who? The sheriff?" "He's clueless," the other replied with a chuckle. "No, someone else. We picked up movement near the outer perimeter last night. Could be a former operative familiar with the area." Evelyn's grip on her knife tightened. They were onto her, but they didn't know how close she was. "Either way," the first man continued, "we secure the site by the end of the week. No more delays." They left the room, their footsteps fading down the corridor. Evelyn waited a few moments before slipping out of her hiding spot. She quickly photographed the blueprints with her phone and made her way back to the entrance. The sun was high in the sky when Evelyn finally returned to her truck. The heat bore down mercilessly, but she barely noticed. Her mind was racing with possibilities and strategies. The Ecliptic was moving faster than she had anticipated. If she didn't act soon, they would gain control of the relay site, and with it, access to technology that could disrupt global communications. Evelyn started the truck and drove back toward Desert's End. She needed allies, and fast. The sheriff might not believe her right away, but there were others in town who might. People who still remembered the strange incidents from years past. As the desert stretched endlessly before her, Evelyn knew one thing for certain. The shadows of her past had finally caught up to her, and this time, she wouldn't run. The sun was setting by the time Evelyn arrived in Desert's End. The warm hues of dusk softened the hard edges of the small, isolated town. People were heading home for the evening, their silhouettes moving like shadows against the amber glow of fading sunlight. Evelyn parked her truck near the town square and scanned the area. She needed information, and she knew exactly where to start. She walked down the narrow street toward the sheriff's office, Kodiak trotting quietly by her side. A few locals nodded in acknowledgement as she passed, but no one stopped to chat. Evelyn had never been much for small talk, and the people of Desert's End had learned to respect her need for privacy. When she reached the sheriff's office, she saw the familiar figure of Sheriff Alan Marks standing on the porch, smoking a cigarette. He was a tall, weathered man in his 50s with graying hair and a perpetual scowl. Despite his gruff exterior, Evelyn knew he cared deeply about the town and its people. "Evening, Evelyn," Marks greeted as he exhaled a plume of smoke. His gaze shifted to Kodiak, who sat obediently by her feet. "Something tells me you're not here for a social visit." "You'd be right," Evelyn replied. "We need to talk." Inside, Marks gave her a curious look but nodded. He stubbed out the cigarette and opened the door, motioning for her to enter. The office was modest, just a couple of desks, a radio, and a wall lined with filing cabinets. Evelyn took a seat across from Marks as he settled into his chair. He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "All right," he said. "What's on your mind?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "Something's happening out in the desert. An organization, probably paramilitary, has moved into the area. They're operating near the old weather station and other abandoned sites. I saw them myself last night. They're armed, well-funded, and they're looking for something buried out there." Marks raised an eyebrow. "And you're sure about this?" "Positive," she said firmly. "These aren't random trespassers. They have tactical training and equipment. Whatever they're after, it's big." Mark sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "We've had some reports of strange activity, out-of-town vehicles, strangers asking questions, but nothing concrete." "You think this is connected to one of those old government projects?" "Yes," Evelyn replied. "Project Horizon." The sheriff leaned forward, his expression darkening. "Haven't heard that name in a long time. Thought that was all classified. One of those Cold War experiments the government swept under the rug." "It was," Evelyn admitted. "But some things were left behind. And now these people are digging them up?" Marks was silent for a moment, processing her words. Finally, he spoke. "All right. What do you need from me?" "I need you to keep an eye on the town," Evelyn said. "Anyone acting suspicious, any vehicles that don't belong, report it to me. I'm going to stop these people, but I can't do it alone." Marks nodded slowly. "You've always been a bit of a ghost around here, Evelyn. But if you say trouble's coming, I believe you. Just don't expect me to put the entire town on high alert without more proof." "You'll have proof soon enough," Evelyn promised as she stood. "Just be ready." As she left the office, Kodiak at her side, Evelyn felt a small weight lift from her shoulders. Marks would do his part, and that gave her a bit of breathing room. But she still had a long way to go. Later that night, Evelyn returned to her cabin and laid out the documents and maps she had gathered. The coordinates from the weather station pointed directly to Sector C3, an area she hadn't visited in years. It was located deep within a canyon, shielded by natural rock formations that made aerial surveillance nearly impossible. She stared at the map for a long moment, memories resurfacing like ghosts. Jackson Kane's face flashed in her mind, his easy smile, the way he always seemed to know what to say to defuse a tense situation. They had been partners during the height of Project Horizon, tasked with safeguarding technology that was both revolutionary and dangerous. But when the project spiraled out of control, Jackson had paid the ultimate price. Evelyn had spent years blaming herself for his death. She shook her head, pushing the memories aside. There was no time for regret. Evelyn pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Evelyn? I thought you were off the grid," Daniel Reed said. He was a former intelligence analyst who had worked with her during their CIA days. "I was," Evelyn replied, "but I need your help. It's urgent." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "All right, what's going on?" "Project Horizon," Evelyn said bluntly. "It's back. A group is trying to recover assets from the old sites. I need intel, anything you can find on recent movements near Desert's End." Reed let out a low whistle. "Horizon? I thought that project was buried. Hell, most of the files were sealed before I even joined the agency." "They were," Evelyn said, "but someone accessed those files. I need to know who and why." "I'll see what I can dig up," Reed promised. "But you need to be careful, Evelyn. If this group has access to classified records, they've got connections. Big ones." "I know," she said quietly. "Thanks, Daniel." "Stay safe," he replied before the line went dead. Evelyn put the phone down and took a deep breath. She wasn't alone anymore, at least not entirely, but the stakes were higher than ever. The following day, Evelyn set out before dawn, heading toward Sector C3. The desert was eerily quiet, the sky a pale gray as the sun struggled to rise over the horizon. Evelyn drove her truck as far as the terrain allowed, then continued on foot with Kodiak. The journey was long and arduous, but she knew the land well. Every ridge, every canyon wall. She had memorized them during her time with Project Horizon. Eventually, she reached the entrance to the sector, marked by a narrow gap between two towering rock formations. "This is it," she whispered to Kodiak. They moved cautiously through the canyon, the walls closing in around them. Evelyn's senses were on high alert, every sound amplified by the echoing rocks. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. Maybe remnants of the old relay equipment, or perhaps an ambush waiting to spring. What she didn't expect was silence. The site appeared untouched, though she knew that couldn't be true. The ecliptic was searching for this place, and it was only a matter of time before they found it. Evelyn approached a large, rusted hatch embedded in the ground. It was sealed tight, but she recognized the markings on it, a series of symbols indicating restricted access. "This is what they're after," she muttered. She knelt and began examining the hatch, searching for any signs of tampering. Just as she was about to stand, Kodiak growled softly. Evelyn froze, her hand moving to the pistol on her hip. Footsteps echoed through the canyon. They weren't alone. Evelyn crouched low beside the rusted hatch, her heart pounding in time with Kodiak's low, continuous growl. The footsteps echoed faintly, drawing closer with each passing second. Someone had followed her into the canyon. More than one person by the sound of it. She placed a calming hand on Kodiak's head, signaling for him to stay quiet. She peeked around a rock formation and spotted them. 3 men in tactical gear, moving with the practiced ease of experienced operatives. Their black uniforms bore no insignias, but Evelyn knew exactly who they were. The ecliptic had found the relay site sooner than expected. "Stay sharp," one of the men whispered to his team. "This place is too quiet." Evelyn exhaled slowly, her mind racing. She needed to assess their numbers and equipment before deciding her next move. If they were scouting the area, they might not have backup nearby. But if they were part of a larger strike team, she couldn't afford to make a mistake. She watched as the men stopped near the hatch, their leader gesturing for one of them to scan the area with a handheld device. "EM readings are spiking," the man said, his voice muffled by his headset. "The asset's definitely here. It's still buried, but the signal's stable." "Command isn't going to wait much longer," the leader replied. "They want this secured within the next 48 hours. Evelyn's jaw tightened. They were accelerating their timeline. If they gained access to the relay, they could reactivate the satellite system, something that could disrupt critical global communications. She couldn't let that happen. She carefully drew her knife, considering her options. Engaging them directly would be risky, but if she could create a distraction, she might be able to draw them away from the site. She scanned the canyon walls and spotted a loose boulder perched high above the trail. "Perfect. Stay here," she whispered to Kodiak. The dog obeyed, though his ears remained alert, eyes locked on the intruders. Moving swiftly and silently, Evelyn climbed the rocky slope. The heat of the rising sun was beginning to creep into the air, but she focused on her target. Years of experience in hostile environments had taught her patience and precision. She reached the boulder and crouched beside it, using a smaller rock as leverage. Below, the men continued their work, unaware of her presence. One of them knelt beside the hatch and began inspecting its surface. "Looks like it hasn't been touched since the 80s, he muttered. "Sealed tight. Blow it open if you have to," the leader ordered. "We don't have time to waste." Evelyn gritted her teeth. The moment they breached that hatch, all hell would break loose. With a final push, she dislodged the boulder, sending it tumbling down the canyon wall. The ground shook as the massive rock crashed onto the trail below, scattering dust and debris. "Contact!" one of the men shouted, scrambling for cover. Evelyn used the chaos to her advantage, sliding down the slope on the opposite side. She landed in a crouch and sprinted toward a narrow passage between the rocks. "Fan out," the leader barked. "Find whoever did that." Evelyn didn't stop to look back. She darted through the maze-like canyon, her footsteps muffled by the soft sand. The sound of the men's radios crackled behind her as they spread out, their voices overlapping in confusion. "Possible hostile in the area. We're splitting up the search," one reported. Evelyn rounded a corner and pressed her back against the canyon wall. She needed to keep them disoriented and separated. She pulled a small flare from her pack and ignited it, tossing it down a side path. The bright light and hissing sound would draw their attention away from her position. As expected, two of the operatives moved toward the flare, weapons raised. Evelyn waited until they passed, then slipped deeper into the canyon. Kodiak met her near the entrance to another narrow passage, his body tense and ready for action. Evelyn knelt beside him, scanning the area. They still had one more man to deal with, the leader. "He'll be looking for me," she whispered. "We need to finish this quickly." They moved in tandem, weaving through the canyon's natural cover. Evelyn spotted the leader near the base of a rock formation, his weapon sweeping the area methodically. He was calm, disciplined, clearly no stranger to high-pressure situations. Evelyn calculated her approach. She couldn't risk a firefight, not here. Instead, she circled around behind him, using the shadows to mask her movements. When she was within striking distance, she drew her knife and crept closer. The man's instincts kicked in at the last moment. He spun around, his eyes widening in surprise. Evelyn lunged, catching his arm and twisting it behind his back. "Drop it," she growled. The man hesitated for a fraction of a second before the cold edge of her knife pressed against his throat. His weapon clattered to the ground. "Who sent you?" Evelyn demanded. "You already know," he said, his voice steady despite the situation. "Why are you accelerating your timeline?" "Orders." "Whose orders?" The man gave a bitter smile. "You think you're stopping this? You're just delaying the inevitable. The ecliptic is everywhere. You can't outrun us." "We'll see about that," Evelyn muttered. With a swift strike, she knocked him unconscious and dragged his body behind a boulder. She searched him quickly, finding a radio and a small encrypted device. She pocketed both and moved back toward Kodiak. "We've got what we need," she whispered. "Time to go." They slipped out of the canyon, using the fading daylight to mask their retreat. Evelyn's mind raced with possibilities. The encrypted device might contain valuable intel, names, locations, operational plans, but decrypting it would take time, and she didn't have much of that. By the time they reached the truck, Evelyn's adrenaline had begun to wear off. She exhaled slowly, leaning against the hood for a moment. Kodiak nuzzled her side, offering silent support. "Good boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. As they drove back toward Desert's End, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that things were escalating faster than she had anticipated. The ecliptic wasn't just after relics of the past. They were preparing for something bigger. She needed to warn the town and find allies willing to fight. Because if the ecliptic succeeded, it wouldn't just be the desert that paid the price. This was only the beginning. The town of Desert's End was wrapped in a tense stillness as Evelyn's truck rolled down the main street. The night had settled heavily over the area, casting deep shadows that clung to the aging buildings. Streetlights flickered weakly, their glow barely cutting through the darkness. Evelyn parked near May's diner, her mind already working through her next steps. She needed information, allies, and a plan. The encrypted device she had taken from the Ecliptic operative could be a key piece of the puzzle, but time was running short. If the Ecliptic launched a full assault on Sector C3, the entire region would be drawn into chaos. Inside the diner, the warm hum of conversation greeted her. A handful of locals were gathered around the counter, sipping coffee and sharing quiet stories. Mei Chun, the diner's owner, was cleaning a stack of plates behind the counter. She glanced up as Evelyn entered, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly in concern. "Evelyn," May called out, "you look like you've seen a ghost." "Not quite," Evelyn replied, removing her hat and taking a seat at the counter. "But something's coming, and I need your help." May set the plates aside and leaned forward. "This about those men you mentioned? The ones poking around near the old weather station?" Evelyn nodded. "It's worse than I thought. They're part of a paramilitary group called the Ecliptic. They're after classified tech buried in the desert, something from a project I was involved in years ago. If they get their hands on it, we're all in trouble." May's expression hardened. "I've been hearing things, vehicles moving at night, strangers asking questions about old sites. I figured it was just government types being nosy again, but this sounds a hell of a lot more serious." "It is," Evelyn said grimly. "They're well-trained and heavily armed. I need to know if anyone in town has seen or heard anything unusual in the past few days. We're going to need every advantage we can get." May gave a sharp nod. "I'll ask around. Most folks here are quiet, but they notice things. If something's off, I'll hear about it." "Thanks," Evelyn said, glancing around the diner. The regulars were watching her with curiosity but said nothing. They trusted May, and by extension, they trusted Evelyn, at least for now. "You be careful out there," May warned. "These kinds of people don't play by the rules." "I know," Evelyn replied, standing. "I've dealt with their type before. But this time, it's personal." Evelyn left the diner and made her way to the sheriff's office. The streets were empty, save for the occasional gust of wind that kicked up dust. Kodiak stayed close to her side, his ears twitching at every distant sound. The lights were still on inside the office, and Sheriff Marks was at his desk, flipping through paperwork. He looked up as Evelyn entered, his brow furrowing in concern. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said, setting his pen down. "Things are escalating," Evelyn replied. "I ran into some of the Ecliptic's men at the old relay site. They know exactly where it is, and they're planning to breach it within the next 2 days." Mark sighed heavily. "Damn, you weren't kidding about the trouble coming fast." She placed the encrypted device on his desk. "I managed to take this from one of their operatives. I need to decrypt it. It might have their plans, or at least some information about their command structure." Marks leaned forward, studying the device. "We don't exactly have high-tech decryption tools around here. You got someone who can handle it?" "I do," Evelyn said, "but they're not local. I'll have to call in a favor." Marks nodded slowly. "All right. What's the plan?" "You can't take on these people alone, Evelyn. I've got deputies, but they're not equipped for a firefight with a paramilitary group." "I know," Evelyn replied. "We're not going to fight them head-on. We'll use the terrain to our advantage. This desert is full of hidden routes and natural choke points. If we can cut off their access to the relay site, we can buy ourselves time." "Time for what?" Marks asked. "For reinforcements," she said, though she knew they might not come. "And to destroy whatever tech they're after." Marks tapped his fingers on the desk thoughtfully. "I'll alert my deputies. We'll increase patrols around the town and the main roads. If anyone suspicious shows up, we'll know about it." "Good," Evelyn said. "And keep an eye on the locals. If the Ecliptic gets desperate, they might use hostages to gain leverage." "Understood," Marks replied. "We'll be ready." By the time Evelyn returned to her cabin, the desert was shrouded in darkness. Stars glittered above like cold, distant beacons. She parked the truck and entered the cabin, Kodiak trotting in after her. She went straight to the underground storage room and retrieved the satellite phone. With a deep breath, she dialed Daniel Reed's number. "Evelyn," Reed answered after a few rings. Didn't expect to hear from you again so soon. What's going on? I need a favor, Evelyn said. I've got an encrypted device from one of the Ecliptics operatives. I need it cracked, fast. Send me the data, Reed replied. I'll see what I can do. But Evelyn, you're playing a dangerous game. If these people are who I think they are, they won't stop until they get what they want. I know, she said quietly, but I've been preparing for this for a long time. Reed was silent for a moment before speaking again. All right, I'll have the decryption started within the hour. Stay safe, Evelyn. This isn't just about old technology anymore. It's about control. I'll stay in touch, she promised before ending the call. She placed the device on her workbench and stared at it for a long moment. Kodiak sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. This isn't just about me anymore, she murmured. It's about protecting everyone who still calls this place home. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, but she welcomed it. She had chosen this life of isolation and preparation for a reason. Now, the time had come to use every skill she had honed over the years. The Ecliptic had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated her. And that was a mistake they wouldn't live to repeat. The early morning sun painted the desert in muted shades of amber and ochre. Evelyn stood at the edge of her property, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Every instinct warned her that the final confrontation was approaching. The Ecliptic wouldn't delay much longer. They knew where the relay site was, and soon, they'd send their full force to secure it. Kodiak sat by her side, his ears twitching at every distant sound. Evelyn knelt beside him, running a hand through his fur. This is it, she murmured. Everything's going to come to a head soon. The encrypted device she had sent to Daniel Reed for decryption had yielded crucial information late the previous night. The Ecliptic was mobilizing multiple strike teams, and their command center was operating just 20 miles south of Desert's End. The data also revealed the name of the man leading the operation. Lucas Grant, a former Black Ops commander with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Evelyn clenched her jaw. She'd faced men like Grant before. They believed in overwhelming force and intimidation, but they also had a fatal weakness. They thought anyone standing against them was already defeated. Not this time. Sheriff Marks and his deputies gathered near the canyon entrance, awaiting Evelyn's instructions. The sheriff had brought in additional support from nearby towns, a mix of law enforcement officers who had experience dealing with cartels and armed groups. It wasn't much compared to the Ecliptic's forces, but Evelyn knew it was enough to hold key positions in the terrain. You're sure about these choke points? Marks asked, pointing to a map Evelyn had spread out on the hood of his patrol SUV. Positive, Evelyn replied. This canyon system is a natural trap. They'll think they have the advantage with numbers and firepower, but the narrow passages will limit their movement. If we control the high ground, we control the battlefield. Deputy Alvarez, a young but capable officer, studied the map intently. And what's the plan for the civilians in town? If things go south, they could get caught in the crossfire. I've already spoken to Mei-chan and a few others, Evelyn said. They'll organize an evacuation to the northern safe zones. The Ecliptic's focus will be on the relay site, not the town, but we're not taking any chances. Marks nodded in approval. All right, we'll set up patrols near the southern roads and keep our radios clear for updates. Let's hope they don't move sooner than expected. They will, Evelyn said quietly. Be ready. By midday, Evelyn was back at the relay site. She and Kodiak navigated the canyon's twists and turns, stopping periodically to check the hidden cameras and motion sensors she had installed over the past week. The equipment fed directly into a secure control hub in her cabin, giving her real-time surveillance of the area. As she approached the rusted hatch, Evelyn ran through the plan in her mind. The Ecliptic's tactical doctrine would be predictable. They'd send an advance team to secure the site, followed by a larger strike force. If she could disable the advance team without alerting the main group, she could buy valuable time. Kodiak growled softly, breaking her thoughts. Evelyn followed his gaze to a ridge overlooking the canyon. A glint of metal caught the light, a rifle scope. Someone was already here. She pressed herself against the canyon wall and signaled for Kodiak to stay low. The sniper hadn't spotted her yet, but it was only a matter of time. Evelyn reached for her binoculars and scanned the ridge. She counted 2 spotters and a sniper, all positioned with clear lines of sight to the relay site. "Advance teams already in place," she muttered. "Let's see how quiet we can be." Using the natural cover of the rocks, Evelyn moved toward the sniper's position. The climb was steep, but years of training had taught her how to move without making a sound. As she reached the top, she drew her knife and crept closer to the sniper's blind spot. The man was focused entirely on the canyon below, his headset crackling softly with radio chatter. Evelyn struck swiftly, knocking him unconscious with a precise blow to the head. She disarmed him and disabled his radio before moving to the spotters. They were farther down the ridge, scanning the landscape with binoculars. Evelyn took out the first with a sleeper hold, and Kodiak lunged at the second, knocking him to the ground. The man struggled briefly before Evelyn silenced him with a swift punch. With the ridge secured, Evelyn dragged the bodies into a nearby crevice and covered them with camouflage netting. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy her a few hours. She retrieved the sniper's rifle and checked the scope. The Ecliptic's main force would arrive soon, and she needed every advantage she could get. An hour later, Evelyn heard the distant rumble of engines. From her vantage point on the ridge, she saw a convoy of armored SUVs and trucks approaching the canyon entrance. Dust billowed in their wake as they came to a stop. Lucas Grant stepped out of the lead vehicle, his imposing figure framed by the afternoon sun. He barked orders to his men, pointing toward the relay site. Evelyn adjusted the sniper scope, centering the crosshairs on Grant's chest. She could end this now with a single shot, but she hesitated. Killing Grant wouldn't stop the Ecliptic. They would regroup, retaliate, and escalate. She needed to send a message instead. Grant turned and gestured toward a communications specialist setting up equipment near one of the trucks. Evelyn smirked and aimed at the antenna array on the truck's roof. She fired, the shot echoing through the canyon as the antenna exploded in a shower of sparks. Chaos erupted. Grant's men scrambled for cover, shouting orders and trying to locate the shooter. Evelyn moved swiftly, changing positions before they could pinpoint her location. "Sniper!" one of the operatives yelled. "Top of the ridge." "Keep moving," Grant barked. "Secure the site. Don't let them stall us." Evelyn fired another shot, disabling a second truck's communication system. She had no intention of holding the ridge indefinitely. Her goal was to disrupt their coordination and force them into the canyon's narrow paths, where her traps awaited. Sheriff Mark's voice crackled over her earpiece. "We're in position at the northern perimeter. What's your status?" "Their advance team's neutralized," Evelyn replied. "Main force is entering the canyon now. Get ready for Phase 2. "Copy that," Mark said. "See you on the other side." As the Ecliptic operatives funneled into the canyon, Evelyn triggered the first set of traps, remote detonated charges that sent boulders crashing down, cutting off their rear escape route. The operatives were now isolated, with no way out but forward. Grant's voice echoed through the canyon, furious but determined. "Stay in formation. Push through. We've dealt with worse before." Evelyn smiled coldly. "Not like this," she whispered. She watched as the operatives advanced deeper into the canyon, unaware that they were being guided into a tactical maze designed for their defeat. This was her battleground, and she knew every inch of it. The desert held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. Evelyn crouched on the ridge, her sniper rifle resting on a boulder as she scanned the advancing Ecliptic operatives below. The canyon's natural pathways twisted and narrowed ahead of them, funneling the strike teams into deadly choke points she had carefully planned. Kodiak growled softly beside her, his amber eyes following the figures moving below. Evelyn gave him a reassuring pat. "This is it, boy. No turning back now." Sheriff Mark's voice came through her earpiece. "We're holding the North Road. They've got some scouts trying to circle around, but we're handling them. How's the canyon looking?" "They're in deeper than they realize," Evelyn replied, her voice calm but laced with tension. "We've got about 2 strike teams in the heart of the trap. Grant is with them." "Grant," Marks muttered. "If he's here in person, they're putting everything into this." "They are. And that's exactly what we want," Evelyn said. "Let them come." Lucas Grant's jaw was set in a grim line, as he marched through the canyon with his strike teams. Dust clung to his tactical vest, and sweat beaded on his brow, but he paid no attention to the discomfort. His mind was focused on the objective, the relay site. The explosions and sniper fire had disrupted their entry, but Grant was no stranger to hostile engagements. He had survived worse, and he wasn't going to let one rogue operator bring this mission to its knees. "Status report," he barked into his headset. "Advance team has encountered blockages," an operative responded. "We're clearing debris now. Communications are intermittent. Enemy may be jamming us." Grant gritted his teeth. "Keep moving. We're not stopping until that site is secured." As he marched forward, however, a gnawing feeling crept into his gut. The enemy knew this terrain too well. Every ambush, every trap. It was like they had anticipated his tactics long before the operation began. "This isn't random," he muttered to himself. "She's been planning this." Evelyn watched as Grant's teams pushed deeper into the canyon. She could see the frustration building in their movements. They were making mistakes, leaving gaps in their formation, splitting up to investigate diversions. She keyed her earpiece. "Deputy Alvarez, you're up. Trigger the secondary charges." "Copy that," Alvarez replied. A series of controlled detonations echoed through the canyon, sending another wave of rock slides cascading onto the pathways. Dust and debris filled the air, cutting off several of the ecliptic teams from each other. The canyon now resembled a labyrinth of dead ends and collapsing routes. Evelyn adjusted her position and fired another precise shot, taking out a support vehicle's engine. The operatives were pinned, scrambling to regroup. "Damn it!" Grant's voice roared through the canyon. "All units, consolidate at waypoint Bravo. Regain control of the situation." But control was the one thing Evelyn wasn't going to give them. At the northern perimeter, Sheriff Marks and his deputies were engaged in a firefight with a scouting unit. Marks ducked behind a patrol truck as bullets pinged off the metal. "Alvarez, how's that flank holding?" Marks shouted into his radio. "We're good," Alvarez responded. "They're trying to break through, but we've got the high ground." Marks risked a glance over the truck's hood and fired 2 quick shots, hitting an enemy operative in the shoulder. The scouts retreated into the brush, their movements becoming more erratic. "They're losing steam," Marks said, grinning grimly. "Keep the pressure on." Evelyn repositioned to a higher vantage point. She needed to draw Grant and his remaining operatives into the final phase of her trap. The path ahead led to a narrow ravine where the walls were close enough to block heavy vehicle movement. It was a perfect kill zone. "Grant," she whispered under her breath, "let's see how good you really are." She switched her radio to an open frequency and transmitted a message. "Lucas Grant," she said, her voice echoing through the canyon. "I know you can hear me. You think you're in control, but you're not. You're in my territory now." There was a pause before Grant's voice crackled through the static. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows your kind," Evelyn replied. "You believe in brute force, but that's your weakness. You don't understand patience. You walked right into a trap I've been building for years." "You're bluffing," Grant snapped. "This ends now." "No, Lucas," Evelyn said softly. "It ends on my terms." Grant clenched his fists as the radio went silent. He looked around at the debris-choked paths and disoriented teams. He knew she was right. Whoever this woman was, she had outmaneuvered him. But he wasn't going to retreat. "Push forward," he commanded. "We'll take the site by force." His operatives surged ahead, but as they entered the ravine, automated defenses activated. Hidden turrets disguised as rock formations opened fire with non-lethal rounds, stun grenades, flashbangs, and rubber-coated projectiles. The canyon erupted into chaos as the ecliptic teams were blinded and disoriented. Grant's men fell back, trying to regroup, but there was no clear route of escape. The canyon walls loomed over them like sentinels, their echoes amplifying the confusion. "This is your last chance," Evelyn's voice called out from the shadows. "Surrender now, or you'll be left here with nothing." Grant's rage boiled over. He fired blindly into the darkness, shouting curses. But deep down, he knew it was over. His men were breaking, their morale shattered by a ghost they couldn't see. Slowly, reluctantly, he dropped his weapon. "Stand down," He ordered his remaining forces. We're done. By the time Sheriff Marks and his deputies arrived to secure the scene, the ecliptic operatives had been disarmed and contained. Evelyn stood atop the ridge, watching as the captured men were led away in handcuffs. Kodiak sat beside her, his posture relaxed but alert. "You did good, boy," she murmured. Marks climbed up to meet her, wiping dust from his hat. "Looks like we got 'em all. Cleanest operation I've seen in a long time." "They'll be back," Evelyn said quietly. "Maybe not Grant, but someone else. They always come back." "Maybe," Marks replied. "But after what you pulled off here, they'll think twice before trying." Evelyn nodded. "That's the goal." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the canyon in shadow, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of peace. The battle was won, but the war for Desert's End was far from over. Still, tonight, she had earned a victory. She would be ready for whatever came next.